Right now, somewhere in your kitchen cabinet, medicine cabinet, or bedside drawer, there's probably a bottle sitting there promising relief. Maybe it's for arthritis, maybe it's for joint pain, maybe it's for inflammation. The label says it helps you move easier, sleep better, live with less pain, and maybe it does for a little while. But if you're over 50 years old, you've probably noticed something. The pain always seems to come back. The bottle changes, the dosage changes, the doctor changes, but somehow the stiffness is still there every morning waiting for you. About 30 miles from where I am sitting right now, tucked into a hollow most people drive past without ever noticing, there was a woman named Martha Greene. Martha lived to 94 years old. She split firewood into her 80s, worked a garden until she was 90, and according to her family, she never once bought arthritis medication. Not because she couldn't afford it, because she didn't believe she needed it. Now, before you think this is some story about a woman who simply tolerated pain better than everyone else, let me tell you something. When Martha was 67 years old, she had arthritis in both hands. The knuckles had started swelling. The fingers had begun stiffening. She could not quilt the way she had quilted her entire life. And for a woman born in those mountains, that was almost unbearable. But what happened next is what caught my attention, because instead of turning to a pharmacy, Martha turned to something her grandmother had taught her decades earlier, a remedy that sat in a mason jar beside the wood stove. By the end of this video, I am going to show you the exact ingredients that went into that remedy. Not 3 ingredients, not 10, just 4. And together they cost less than a single bottle of most arthritis supplements. But more importantly, I am going to share something I found buried inside a discussion about inflammation and aging. One observation that helps explain why so many older Appalachian men and women remain active well into their 80s and 90s. And no, it wasn't genetics, it wasn't luck, and it wasn't because they never worked hard. If anything, they worked harder than most of us ever will. This matters whether you're living on 100 acres in the mountains or sitting in a suburban home right now, rubbing your knees every time you stand up from a chair, because the pain may not be coming from where you've been told it is. And the mountain families understood that long before arthritis became a billion-dollar industry. Martha Greene was one of those people who made you question everything you thought you knew about aging. The first time I met her, she was 89 years old, tiny woman, maybe 5'2", gray hair tied back, hands rough from decades of work. Yet when she shook my hand, her grip felt stronger than men half her age. Every morning she woke before sunrise, fed chickens, worked her garden, hung laundry, walked a quarter mile to check on a neighbor, and she did all of it with joints that should have been giving her trouble, at least according to modern expectations. Meanwhile, I watched my uncle take the opposite path. Good man, hard worker, coal miner for nearly 30 years, but by his late 50s, the arthritis had started creeping in. First the knees, then the shoulders, then the hands. One prescription became 2, 2 became 3. Soon every morning started with pills. Every evening ended with pills. Yet somehow he never seemed to get ahead of the pain. By the time he was Martha's age, walking across a parking lot looked exhausting. Martha spent maybe $20 a year making her remedy. My uncle spent thousands. That math bothered me, so I started asking questions. And what I discovered changed the way I look at arthritis entirely. The first thing you need to understand is that arthritis isn't always the same thing as aging. We've been taught to think they are. Pain equals age. Stiffness equals age. Swollen joints equal age. But that's not necessarily true, because if aging automatically caused crippling arthritis, every elderly person would suffer the same way. Yet they don't. Some 70-year-olds struggle to climb stairs, others hike mountains. Some 80-year-olds can barely open a jar, others still split wood. So what's the difference? The mountain families believed arthritis wasn't just about worn-out joints. They believed it was connected to inflammation. And interestingly enough, modern research increasingly points in that direction too. Inflammation is the body's emergency response system. When it stays active too long, problems start showing up everywhere. The joints, the muscles, the digestive system, the cardiovascular system, the entire body. Now think about modern life. Highly processed food, sugar in nearly everything, chronic stress, poor sleep, little movement, constant stimulation. The average American today consumes things most Appalachian families wouldn't even recognize as food. Martha didn't know the science behind inflammation. She didn't need to. She simply knew what happened when families drifted away from old habits. She watched it happen. And according to her, there was one remedy mountain families kept turning back to whenever joint pain began creeping into daily life. But here's where the story gets interesting. Because the remedy itself wasn't the whole answer. And this is the part nobody talks about anymore. When people think about Appalachia, they imagine poverty, isolation, hardship. But they forget something. These communities had to solve problems themselves. There were no pharmacies around every corner, no television commercials, no supplements shipped overnight. If something worked, it survived. If it didn't, people stopped using it. That's how mountain knowledge evolved. Not through marketing, through results. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, mountain families relied heavily on plant remedies, food remedies, and seasonal practices passed down through generations. Some disappeared because they didn't work. Others survived for over a century. The arthritis remedy Martha used was one of the survivors. And what fascinated me most wasn't the ingredients. It was the consistency. Family after family told nearly identical stories. Different counties, different states, different generations. Yet somehow, the same remedy kept appearing. That got my attention. Because when knowledge survives for 100 years without advertising, somebody must have been getting results. And that brings us to the first ingredient. Not the entire remedy, just the first piece. Because when I started digging through old family journals, church cookbooks, and oral histories collected from mountain communities, one ingredient kept appearing over and over again: apple cider vinegar. Not the bright filtered stuff you see lined up in grocery stores today, the cloudy kind, the kind with strands floating through it, what mountain families called living vinegar. Now Martha never talked about acetic acid, she never discussed gut bacteria, she certainly never read medical journals. But she did know this: whenever her hands started stiffening up in the fall, she'd begin taking a spoonful every evening. And according to her daughters, within a few weeks, she always seemed to move easier. Again, not proof, not magic, just an observation repeated across decades. The second ingredient surprised me even more: honey, raw honey, mountain honey, the kind local beekeepers harvested from tulip poplar blossoms and wildflowers, not only because it sweetened the remedy, but because mountain families believed it carried the healing properties of the land itself. One elderly resident from eastern Kentucky described honey as summer sunshine stored in a jar. I've never forgotten that phrase. Summer sunshine stored in a jar. The third ingredient was ginger. Today you'll find ginger capsules on every supplement shelf in America. But mountain families weren't buying capsules. They were grating fresh ginger root into remedies long before supplement companies figured out they could sell it. And the final ingredient, that's where almost everyone gets surprised. Because it wasn't exotic, it wasn't rare, and it wasn't expensive. It was turmeric. Long before turmeric became trendy, Appalachian families had adopted it through trade routes, traveling medicine sellers, and old family recipes. By the early 1900s, it had quietly become part of several mountain remedies for aching joints. Now, before I tell you how all four ingredients came together, there is something else you need to understand. Because the remedy alone does not explain why Martha remained active into her 90s, and this is where the story takes another turn. I know what some people are thinking. Here we go again. Another homemade remedy, another folk cure. Fair enough. You should be skeptical. Mountain families were skeptical too. They did not keep using something because it sounded good. They kept using it because they could see the results. And that is what fascinated me. Because every person I interviewed eventually told me the same thing. The remedy helped. But the remedy was not the secret. The secret was what happened around the remedy. You see, modern Americans tend to treat arthritis as an isolated problem. Pain shows up. Take something. Pain goes away. Mountain families looked at things differently. They believed aching joints were often a sign that the entire body had fallen out of balance. So whenever someone started struggling with arthritis, they did not just change one thing, they changed several. Food, movement, sleep, and one specific daily habit that I will share with you in a few minutes. That habit is what surprised me most, because modern science is finally beginning to understand why it may have worked. But first, you have waited long enough. Let us talk about the remedy itself. Here's exactly how Martha prepared it. Every evening after supper, 1 tablespoon of raw apple cider vinegar, 1 tablespoon of raw local honey, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground turmeric, a small pinch of fresh grated ginger, all mixed into a mug of warm water. Not boiling, warm. She would stir it slowly with a spoon until the honey dissolved. Then she would sit by the stove and drink it over 10 or 15 minutes. That was it. No expensive supplements, no complicated preparation, no mystery ingredients, just 4 things most people can find without leaving town. Now let's be clear, I am not telling you this cures arthritis. I am telling you this is the remedy Appalachian families returned to generation after generation whenever joint pain began interfering with daily life. And according to those families, consistency mattered more than quantity. Not once, not twice, every evening, week after week, month after month, the same way Martha had done for decades. But here's the part almost nobody remembers anymore, and it may have been even more important than the drink itself. When I spoke with Martha's daughters, they all remembered one strange thing. Their mother never sat down for long periods during the day, ever. Not because she was exercising, because she believed movement kept joints alive. Every hour or so, she would find some reason to move. Check the garden, sweep the porch, walk to the mailbox, feed the chickens, stretch her fingers, anything. One mountain saying came up repeatedly in interviews: what rusts still, stays still. Think about that. What rusts still, stays still. Today we understand that movement helps maintain joint function, circulation, and flexibility. The mountain families did not know the science. They knew the result. And when researchers study populations that remain active later into life, movement consistently appears as one of the strongest predictors of mobility, not intense exercise. Movement, constant, gentle movement. Martha was not drinking a miracle cure. She was combining a traditional remedy with a lifestyle that never allowed her body to completely stiffen up. And that is the piece most people miss. So, if you want to try the mountain approach, here is exactly what I would do. Tonight, mix the drink. 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, 1 tablespoon of raw honey, a 1/4 teaspoon of turmeric, a small pinch of fresh ginger, warm water. Drink it slowly after supper. Then tomorrow, move. Not a marathon, not a gym membership, just movement. Walk around the block, work in the yard, stretch your hands, stand up more often. Do what mountain families did naturally. Try it consistently for 30 days. Because the mountain remedy was not really a product, it was a system. And systems tend to work better than shortcuts. Think about the math for a minute. Americans spend billions every year chasing relief. Supplements, pain creams, prescriptions, procedures, devices. Yet many of the strongest, most active people I encountered in Appalachia relied on simple routines that cost almost nothing. A few ingredients, a little movement, a little consistency. That is it. Maybe the most important thing I can tell you tonight is this. The mountain families did not wait until their joints failed before taking care of them. They protected them every day. And that may have been the real secret all along. I want to hear from you in the comments. What did your parents or grandparents use for aching joints? Did they have a remedy, a tea, a tonic, a habit? Because every week I discover another piece of old mountain knowledge that nearly disappeared. And chances are, your family still remembers some of it. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe. We're building a library of Appalachian wisdom that deserves to be remembered. Next week, I'm going to share the old Appalachian winter cough remedy families relied on long before modern cold medicine. One of the ingredients is probably sitting in your pantry right now. Until then, keep moving. Take care of your joints. And remember something the mountains figured out a long time ago. The body was built to work with nature, not against it.